The Hino Contessa 1300 Coupe is one of those cars that many people have never heard of, but it has an interesting history. It was a Japanese car designed by an Italian, built with serious engineering, and even had a brief career in motorsports. Despite all that, it disappeared after only a few years. This is the story of the Hino Contessa 1300 Coupe, a car that could have been more successful but never got the chance. Hino Motors was originally a truck and bus manufacturer in Japan. In the early 1960s, they decided to enter the passenger car market. Their first attempt was the Hino Contessa, a small rear-engine sedan introduced in 1961. The car had some influence from Renault, as Hino had a technical partnership with the French company. In 1964, Hino introduced a new version of the Contessa known as the PD series. It had a more modern design and came with a 1.3-liter engine, producing 55 horsepower. But the most interesting version was the Hino Contessa 1300 Coupe, which was launched in 1965. The design of the Contessa 1300 Coupe came from Italian designer Giovanni Michelotti. He was known for designing European cars like the Triumph 1300, which had a similar shape. The coupe had a sleek, fastback look, making it stand out among Japanese cars of the time. It had 2 doors and a 2+2 seating arrangement, meaning it had small rear seats. Under the rear hood was a 1.3-liter inline-4 engine. At first, it produced 55 horsepower, but later models with twin carburetors and a higher compression ratio made 65 horsepower. The car had a 4-speed manual transmission, and the coupe versions had a floor-mounted shifter. While the performance was not amazing, it was good for a small car of that era. The top speed was around 130 kilometers per hour. The car was relatively light, weighing around 2,077 pounds. Hino had big plans for the Contessa. They tried exporting it to different countries, including Australia, Switzerland, the Netherlands, and New Zealand. In New Zealand, Campbell Motors assembled around 600 units, but the car struggled in international markets. Hino also wanted to boost its image through motorsports. American designer and racer Pete Brock, along with his Brock Racing Enterprises team, prepared 2 Contessa sedans for competition. One of them surprisingly won the 1966 Los Angeles Times Grand Prix. Pete Brock later developed a faster, lightweight coupe version called the Samurai. It was promising, but things did not go far. By 1966, Hino's passenger car business was in trouble. The company had formed an alliance with Toyota, which focused on front-engine, rear-wheel drive cars. As a result, Hino stopped making the Contessa. Production officially ended in March 1967, but some unfinished cars were completed in 1968. In October 1969, the last 175 units were built from leftover parts. Today, the Hino Contessa 1300 Coupe is a rare car. It was a unique mix of Japanese engineering and Italian design, but in the end, it could not survive the changing automotive industry. It is now a piece of history, remembered by those who appreciate unusual cars. In the late 1960s, Mazda was in the middle of something big. The company had already made a name for itself with its rotary engine technology, something that set it apart from other Japanese car makers. But Mazda wanted to take things further. The goal was to create something stylish, unique, and ahead of its time. This led to the birth of the Mazda R130 Luce rotary coupe. Unlike anything Mazda had done before, this car had a sleek, European-inspired design and a rotary engine placed in the front while driving the front wheels. It was a bold experiment, but not one that would last very long. The Mazda R130 was designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro, an Italian designer working for Bertoni at the time. Giugiaro was known for creating some of the most stylish cars of that era, and his touch was evident in the R130. The coupe had smooth lines, a long hood, and a fastback-style rear, making it look more like something from a European luxury brand than a typical Japanese car of the time. Some even compared it to the NSU Ro 80, a German car that also used a rotary engine. The first time the world saw this design was at the 1967 Tokyo Motor Show, where it was introduced as the RX-87 concept. The response was positive, so Mazda moved forward with production. By October 1969, the car was ready for the market. Instead of naming it RX-87, Mazda gave it a more refined name, the R130 Luce Rotary Coupe. Luce means light in Italian, which added to its sophisticated appeal. Mazda built this car with performance in mind. Under the hood was a 1.3-liter 13A twin-rotor Wankel engine. This engine produced 126 horsepower at 6,000 revolutions per minute and 172 newton-meters of torque at 3,500 revolutions per minute. It was enough to push the car to a top speed of 190 kilometers per hour. But what really made the R130 different was its front-wheel drive system. This was the first and only time Mazda would make a rotary-powered front-wheel drive car. It was a rare decision, especially since most rotary-powered cars were rear-wheel drive. The car measured 4,585 millimeters in length, 1,635 millimeters in width, and 1,385 millimeters in height. The wheelbase was 2,580 millimeters, and the car weighed around 2,600 pounds. It was not exactly light, but it handled well for its time. Mazda marketed the R130 as a premium car, and the pricing reflected that. It was sold between 1.45 million and 1.75 million Japanese yen, making it one of Mazda's most expensive cars at the time. Because of this, it earned the nickname Lord of the Road. But being expensive was not always a good thing. The high price meant that not many people could afford it. By the time production ended in 1972, fewer than 1,000 units had been made. Today, the Mazda R130 is a rare collector's item. It never gained mainstream success, but it remains an interesting part of Mazda's history. It was stylish, unique, and one of a kind. Mazda never tried making another front-wheel drive rotary car after this, and maybe for a good reason. The Datsun 2000 Roadster was a car that made a mark in the late 1960s, yet today, it is often overshadowed by more famous sports cars. Nissan, known at the time as Datsun in many markets, had been building small roadsters for a while. Before the 2000 Roadster, there was the 1500 and 1600 Roadster, both of which were decent sports cars. But Nissan wanted more. They wanted to compete with the likes of British sports cars such as the MGB and Triumph TR4. So, in 1967, the company introduced the Datsun 2000 Roadster, also known as the Fairlady 2000 in Japan. This car was powered by a 2.0-liter, 1,982 cubic centimeter inline four-cylinder engine called the U20. It had a single overhead camshaft, which was an advanced feature at the time. The standard model produced 135 horsepower at 6,000 revolutions per minute and 132 pound-feet of torque at 4,400 revolutions per minute. But for those who wanted more power, there was an optional competition package. This version included dual Mikuni Solex carburetors and a special camshaft, increasing the horsepower to 150. This was impressive for a lightweight car that only weighed about 2,000 pounds. One of the biggest advantages of the Datsun 2000 Roadster was its 5-speed manual transmission. In an era where many sports cars had only 4-speed gearboxes, this gave the Datsun a real edge. The extra gear allowed the car to maintain higher speeds without overworking the engine. It had a top speed of around 173 kilometers per hour and could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 8.4 seconds. For a small Japanese roadster, that was quick. The car measured 3,955 millimeters in length, 1,496 millimeters in width, and stood at 1,326 millimeters tall. It had a wheelbase of 2,281 millimeters, which contributed to its balanced handling. The front suspension used unequal length A-arms with coil springs, while the rear had a live axle with semi-elliptic leaf springs. This setup was fairly common at the time and gave the car decent handling, although it was not as refined as some European competitors. In 1968, safety regulations led to some design changes. The windshield became taller, and the rearview mirror was integrated into it. The dashboard was updated with padded surfaces, and the switches were no longer the older toggle style. The exterior door handles were changed to a flush-fitting lift-up design, making the car slightly more modern in appearance. The 2000 Roadster was not just a street car, it had a strong presence in motorsports, particularly in the Sports Car Club of America races. Drivers such as John Morton and Bob Sharp took the car to victory in several competitions. These wins helped establish Nissan's reputation in the American racing scene and paved the way for future performance models. Although the Datsun 2000 Roadster was a well-made and fast sports car, it was soon overshadowed by Nissan's next big project, the Datsun 240Z. The 240Z was more powerful, had a more modern design, and was built as a full-fledged sports coupe rather than a small roadster. As a result, the 2000 Roadster faded into history, becoming a lesser-known but still respected car among collectors. The Toyota Sports 800 is one of the most interesting sports cars in automotive history. It was Toyota's first production sports car, yet many people today have never heard of it. It was small, lightweight, and efficient, almost the opposite of what many think a sports car should be. But this little machine had some impressive engineering, an unusual engine layout, and a surprising racing record. To understand why the Toyota Sports 800 existed, we have to go back to the early 1960s. In 1962, Toyota unveiled a concept car called the Publica Sports at the Tokyo Motor Show. It was based on Toyota's small economy car, the Publica 700, but it looked completely different. It had a futuristic sliding canopy instead of regular doors. The Publica Sports got a lot of attention, but Toyota knew they needed to make changes before selling it to the public. The sliding canopy was replaced with traditional doors, and a removable targa top was added, something few cars had at the time. In 1965, Toyota released the production version and named it the Sports 800. In Japan, people called it the Yotahachi, which was short for Toyota 8. The design was led by Shozo Sato, while Tatsuo Hasegawa handled engineering. Hasegawa had a background in aircraft design, and that influence is clear in the Sports 800. It was built to be as light as possible. The body used thin steel, and aluminum was used for certain parts, including the roof and seat frames. As a result, the car weighed about 1,280 pounds. That is lighter than most modern motorcycles. The Sports 800 was powered by a 790 cubic centimeters, two-cylinder, air-cooled engine called the 2UB. It only made 45 horsepower at 5,400 revolutions per minute and 72 newton-meters of torque at 3,800 revolutions per minute. That does not sound like much, but because the car was so light, it could reach a top speed of around 160 kilometers per hour. The engine was taken from the Toyota Publica but was modified with a larger displacement and dual carburetors. It also had a 4-speed manual transmission. The Sports 800 was small. It measured only 3,580 millimeters long, 1,465 millimeters wide, and 1,175 millimeters tall, with a 2,000 millimeter wheelbase. It was not built for luxury. It was built for efficiency, which is why some reports claim it could achieve as much as 3.2 liters per 100 kilometers. Toyota built the Sports 800 from 1965 to 1969. A total of 3,131 units were made, with most of them being right-hand drive for the Japanese market. However, Toyota also built around 300 left-hand drive versions. These were sent to Okinawa, which was under American control at the time, where people drove on the right side of the road. Some of these were also sent to the United States for evaluation, but Toyota never officially sold the Sports 800 in America. Despite its tiny engine, the Sports 800 performed surprisingly well in motorsports. In the 1967 Fuji 24-hour race, it finished in third place behind two Toyota 2000 GTs. What made this result even more impressive was that it did not need to stop for refueling. The car's lightweight and efficient engine gave it an advantage in endurance racing. Today, the Toyota Sports 800 is a rare and highly valued collector's car. It helped pave the way for Toyota's later sports cars like the Toyota 2000 GT, the Celica, and even the Supra. Though it was never a global sensation, it remains an important part of Toyota's history. It proved that a sports car does not have to be big or powerful to be exciting. And with fuel prices today, maybe a 790 cubic centimeters engine does not sound so bad after all.